Thank you, Diane. And thank you, Diane, and thanks for everybody for joining this afternoon, evening here in London. The session is on the art of listening and really emotionally connecting with your audience. As we said in the invite, whether you're in-house in a big corporate or you're running your own business, everybody invests heavily in trying to connect with their audience to get their project over the line, to advance change in an organization, to get their product to market, to get their brand understood. We formed the listening people to help leaders and organizations really make meaningful connections with their employees, clients, and their communities. And as you'll have guessed from our name, listening is at the core of what we do. It's the foundation for the majority of all the work that we do for our clients, whether it's helping them articulate their purpose, developing their brand narrative, communicating their business strategy internally, or creating a digital ad campaign. We believe that listening is the key to connecting with audiences at a more emotional level, because if you better understand your audience, their pains and their needs, and how your message or service is landing with them, you'll achieve an authentic connection that will meet both their needs and yours. And too often we feel like organizations and indeed founders don't do enough of really trying to understand their audience, because we get too caught up in trying to articulate our product or our project, our brand, etc. And we kind of lose sight of what our audience's needs, pains, motivations, and all of that sort of thing is. So we believe that good listening can inform everything from your service or product offering to your communications, messaging, and the channels, and indeed how to even innovate what you're doing. We think it gets a much better return on your investment in any of the brand or communications work that you're doing. So over the next 50 minutes or so, what we'd like to do is a little bit on the art of listening itself, talk about connecting at an emotional level, talk about the value of listening exercises, and then get into a couple of tools that are often used to help with understanding audiences, and those are personas and journey mapping. And then we'll take any questions, but do please feel free to ask any questions or contribute throughout. I'm really delighted to have some friends along for the session to make it interactive. And so I'm pleased to introduce Simone Barbiera, who is the CEO of HubDot, and she'll share her unique approach to really connecting with people. I mean, she is the queen of emotional connections, I would say. I'm also really thrilled to have Julia Elliott-Brown, who's the CEO of Enter the Arena. And Julia's company, they're business coaches and investment advisors to female founders, and making a huge difference for female founders and their ability to raise investment in particular. And Julia worked with the listening people on a listening exercise and some brand work in the last year or so. So she's been kind enough to agree to share her experience and learnings from that. And then really thrilled to have my colleague Esther Marchetti, who is the head of insights for the listening people. We work on a lot of listening exercises together. She is also the head of innovation for a market research company called Bolt, and is previous at big brands like Unilever, where she also worked on insights and innovation. So has huge depth of experience to share with us today. So just moving on to the art of listening. I am a big fan of a chap called Oscar Trimboli, who is actually based in Australia, and he has done a lot of work around deep listening. He's got, some fantastic statistics about the fact that we've all predominantly had presentation skills, but very few of us have ever done any training around around listening. He also has some interesting stats around, we speak at about 125 words a minute, but we process words at about 400 words a minute. So we've always got, more in our heads to say than is actually coming out. So there's a lot more to listening than just the words that we hear from the person that we're listening to. So borrowing from some of his work, so the benefits of deep listening, and this is kind of more at the personal or individual level before we start talking about listening as organizations, if you like. So the benefits are, fairly obvious, getting to clarity and avoiding misunderstanding, true engagement with others, a sense of connection, the positive relationships that brings, whether they're work or personal, faster and more efficient outcomes if you're taking away all the opportunity for misunderstanding, assumptions, etc. The emotional connection and information knowledge sharing that comes with having really heard somebody, and then the empathy, because you've got a better understanding of who they are and where they come from. So a little bit, again, borrowing from Oscar on what really makes a great listener. They show focus and pay attention to what you are saying, and we'll come on a little bit to the different levels of listening in a second. The combination of creating the environment, safety and space for someone to speak, together with the presence and engagement of the listener so that the speaker feels heard. And Simone, when we come on to HubDot, I think is a great example of creating that space. The ability to tune out inner thoughts and avoid the temptation to plan a response before the other person has finished speaking. Oscar also has a survey that you can do and find out what kind of a listener that you are. And certainly where I came out, one was a mix of dramatic and the other was shrewd. And when you're a shrewd listener, you're always trying to solve the speaker's problem before they've even articulated a problem. So it's good to be aware of our different styles. A good listener pays full attention to what is being said and provides physical and verbal feedback to show they're listening. They internalize and understand and play back that meaning to the speaker. And again, this needs to be authentic and not just the trained nodding dog motions that sometimes we see people acting out their active listening, if you like. A good listener also shows care, curiosity, and genuine interest in others. And they also have the ability to shut up, to really, not feel the need to say anything, you can leave a pause and a little bit of silence for the person to think about, what they want to go on and say. And then obviously, the questions that we as listeners then ask the speaker to really go back and clarify and play back. So Oscar would also say that there are 5 levels of listening. And he recommends that the first step is really listening to yourself. So kind of tuning in and thinking about what's going on in your head, whether you're ready to receive, and then clearing out that clutter and being, present and in the moment with whoever you're speaking with. Then obviously listening to the content, so paying close attention to the words and what the speaker is saying, and then really working through the context for that content, and then asking the meaningful questions about the context that help bring it to life and get to the meaning. There's something about listening for the unsaid, so what's not being said by the speaker, and really thinking about what that might be. And then finally, listening for the meaning. So he has a great quote in terms of the dirty secret of listening. It's not your job to make sense of what the speaker is saying, but actually what they're meaning. And again, back to that that statistic that, you know, you're speaking 125 words a minute, but you've got 400 words processing in your brain. So there's a lot that is not coming out. And with the listening people, we also like to think about deconditioning our thinking, so that we really are listening to what is being said and we're not filtering based on our day-to-day experience. So the way I like to think about that is, you know, what am I thinking that I'm conditioned to think about, and how would I be thinking or receiving this information if I wasn't conditioned? And likewise, when we're speaking to somebody, I've often found that people filter based on, you know, your job title. So you come into a room, you say you're a brand or communications person, you ask a question, and the speaker will filter their answer based on what they think the information you need to know based on your assumed persona of whatever that is. So I think it's always good to think about, you know, how are we filtering, and what would we be hearing if we removed those filters? Would there be a bigger story? Would we hear more, etc.? So that's just a little bit on the art of listening. I think in terms of what also gets in the way is, as mentioned earlier, we get so caught up in getting the message down for our own product, really understanding what it is ourselves, etc., and miss the opportunity to then put it in the context of our audiences. And then that leads to what we call it the listening people and expectation gap. So we know what we want to say about the product, but we don't necessarily know how our message is being received by our audience. So that's why we always start with a listening exercise to really touch base with employees or customers or whoever that audience is, to make sure that they are understanding your message in the way that you had intended it to be understood. And we often find that there is an expectation gap, and that is the gap that needs to be closed for success. There's obviously various different tools for listening. If we kind of escalate now to more of a corporate or company level, so there's everything from brand surveys, employee surveys, focus groups, social listening, desk research, so many ways to do it. Many are effective. What I would be wary of, though, is often with research, we think about our hypothesis before we think about our questions. And so we're driving our audience to the answers that we want to hear. So again, if you are embarking on a listening exercise, really challenging for what are the questions that will really get what the view and what we need from the audience, that aren't, you know, too prescriptive or filtered towards the answers that we want to hear. And I guess in thinking about embarking on any kind of listening exercise in, you know, with an audience, I have a big don't, and the don't is, you know, don't do it unless you fully intend to do something with the findings. So, you know, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, that you are committed to taking action around the insights that you glean. So I think there's, you know, a fair amount of research out there where employee surveys in particular, you know, people get frustrated that they fill in these employee surveys and then nobody actually does anything with the findings. So taking action as a result of what you hear is really important. So just onto, you know, one of the formats and emotionally connecting. So as I said, there's many different ways that we can listen from a one-to-one perspective, but also in different formats. And here I want to bring in Simone, who has at its most basic, a networking platform, but her approach really helps people connect on an emotional level. So I just wanted to chat with Simone about well, first of all, Simone, why don't you share your story?
Hi everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here and to meet all of you. I've been listening very, very carefully, and I love all the words that you've used, being genuine and authentic, and this is really absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to start with my story in a HubDot style in a couple of minutes. So I'm originally from Napoli, the south of Italy. I've been in London for 23 years. I started the university. I really very much wanted to do international law, and then ended up in London working for Goldman Sachs in corporate events. A very sort of strange beginning in London, but wonderful few years. Then left and went into jazz singing. So I sing jazz professionally in my free time, and at the time I was doing it full time while raising 3 kids. And the story starts there because I found myself in a very strange place where I was at dinner parties, I was, at some networking events, and I felt that people were not really listening to me. They were projecting a perception that they had about me. I felt that they wanted to squeeze me in a box. They wanted me to fit into the label of the ex-Goldman Sachs, or the label, but you're a jazz musician, but you live in this area of London. And there was a lot of superficial assumptions. And I got very tired of fundamentally feeling that networking events were not empowering experiences. I felt somehow, and this was very much my own story, but we know now almost 10 years on of HubDot, and having touched the lives of many thousands of people all over the world with a network of 32,000 people, that a lot of people feel the same, that maybe there are a certain environment in which you don't feel the best you can be. You don't really feel that you're networking in a way that is empowering and very human. So in 2012, I had this idea. I just thought, I've got to really create a way of networking that makes me feel amazing, that is based on looking at the almost like the possibilities of the future, and not on those labels that maybe are not serving me anymore. Maybe I don't want to use those labels. There are some labels that we keep and we love them, but others that we want to let go. And so I thought, how can I create a space where the musician friends that I have and incredible talented creatives can meet my corporate friends and the Goldman Sachs and the corporate lawyers? How can I get my full-time moms who are taking, a bit of a career break to meet with the tech entrepreneurs and feel that maybe they've got a lot of things in common? I was thinking of a way of cutting through that networking by labels. And most of all, I was thinking of a way of creating a place where people could really listen to each other, and they could listen to each other's stories. So I came up with the idea of 5 dots, replacing job titles. And so we network by intention. We put our stories at the heart of how we connect. And whether we're running an event for Bank of America, for Credit Suisse last week, we did a beautiful conference for the LGBTQIA community, whether it's a local government, whether it's a community, on the other side of the world, the formula is very simple. We want to create a space where those barriers just come down, and you are there with your story, and people, create a connection that we define as alchemy, which is behind me. And alchemy is when stories are at the heart, and all of a sudden, even if it's a corporate environment, the MD is talking to an intern, and those 2 individuals who have so many barriers between them, whether it's the generational gap, whatever it is, all of a sudden start talking to each other, and there is that emotional connection. And funnily enough, it's the emotional connection, I think, is often very, very much misunderstood, because it's not really about being emotional. People used to say, but you're very Italian, you're very emotional. That's why. It's got nothing to do with that. Emotional connection is about a human connection. It's about individuals connecting for me, in the ultimate way that, human beings are, and we're very good at. And by the way, in a traditional terms, I think is also quite a sort of a feminine way of doing it, which I think somehow maybe in the corporate environment hasn't really been celebrated, but I'm not going to go down the route because otherwise I'm going to talk for too long. All I would say is that when there is alchemy, and when the connection is based on that emotional exchange, there is this sort of feeling of sharing a very strong alignment. You feel in alignment with another human being. And we can only experience that if we truly put our heart and our mindset and our true authentic stories at the heart. It's okay, this is my job, this is what I do, but maybe my mindset is this today, and I want to connect with you, and I want to look for that common ground. I think it's really all about creating that togetherness feeling, because when that happens, literally incredible things do happen. Helen, how am I doing with time?
Good. So I think
Okay.
you know, you've got some disarming approaches that really do help then, you know, people turn up and tell their full story. And so one of them is, instead of saying what do you do, it is the what's your story, and giving people license to tell that broader story, and that isn't just, you know, filtered through, or what do you do and how important are you. And then I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, the other thing that I think is really rich is that the formal storytelling that happens at a HubDot event, people only have 90 seconds to tell their story. And in that 90 seconds, my experience is that the richness that comes from the people on the stage, and the hooks for them, they're like magnets, you know, they get off the stage, and you know, everybody is just trying to, you know, catch up with them and get a little piece of them. And they've been managed to do that magnetism in just a minute and a half, which I think is really powerful.
Absolutely. That is very much the heart of our formula, of our methodology. Really, it's those stories, and everyone has a great story to tell. But what we really work on, and when we coach, you know, the individuals we work with, whether it's in a big organization or a charity or whatever the environment, we really say, so what is your story? And everyone, everyone, after 10 years of HubDot, I can tell you, 9 out of 10 would say, I don't really have a story to tell, not me. Because everyone goes into this mindset of, you know, the speaker, the story that is an incredible story, but it's the story that you think people want to hear by yourself. The question is, what is your story today? What is that mindset? And we look for a key message and we help you find it, that is the most empowering experience. So everyone has a great story to tell. And if networking starts with hi, less of a sort of an ego-driven and elitist type of approach, and more of, hi, I'm here to listen to you. I really value these 5 minutes that we have together. So tell me about your story. It's a beautiful start. It's a great opener, you know, and it just works in every single environment, whether it's a small workshop for 20 people, or whether it's, you know, on a big stage with 600. You're absolutely right. The magnetism comes from sharing authentically. And you know, and it's really interesting, because when I talk to a lot of leaders, some leaders think about, you know, this sort of emotional connection and the storytelling maybe as a way of showing, you know, weaknesses, or, you know, I can't possibly show that vulnerability, or maybe others think that it's not relevant. They get on with the work. And what we're trying to do now, and I think the world is probably ready for it, is actually let's be vulnerable, let's be real, let's be authentic, and let's start with that authentic story and then see what happens. Even if it's with a group of colleagues, it's powerful, truly powerful.
And then another important aspect of it is, certainly for the formal storytellers, is a little bit of coaching, and particularly when they come from a traditional corporate setting, so that, you know, Simone's team encourages those folks to remove the filter of what they think their corporate parent wants to hear, and really dig in and share their actual story. Obviously, maybe in the context or to a theme that's to do with the corporate, but to get to that real story. So I bring it up to here as a, you know, as well as the great emotional connections that come from it, but also as a format for really listening to your audience. So you can get your audience, whether, as Simone says, it's 20 people or 600 people, into a room, or virtually, give them a theme, invite them to tell their stories in a minute and a half, and then suddenly you've got really rich insights from your audience that will help inform, shape whatever it is that you're working on, whether it's a major piece of change, whether it's your purpose, or you bringing your purpose to life internally, or it's your brand or product that you are delivering.
Absolutely.
So
So I want to hear, I'm here, and I want to hear everyone's story. I'm here. You know me very well, Helen. I'm thinking, I'm seeing all the names, and I'm really curious, because I can't possibly leave this event without hearing, you know, the stories, right?
Exactly. But maybe we'll get a chance a little later to hear from people. But moving on to now another form of listening. And so what the listening people have done and are doing with many clients is we'll go out and interview our clients' customers or clients or their employees with the specific goal in mind. And so what we typically do is work with our client to identify who would be good people to speak to, who will give authentic answers. We'll create a discussion guide that uncovers what it is we're looking for, but it'll tend to understand a little bit about our interviewees' story, their priorities and challenges, how they're experiencing our client, what the service levels, what they think of the brand, all of that sort of thing. And then that leads to all manner of different outputs. But I thought we might bring it to life again by sharing a case study and inviting Julia to share a little bit of her experience of having done a listening exercise for her business. So Julia, why don't we start with what your story is before we get into the case study?
Hi, yes. Just checking that I'm coming onto the screen. Can you just hear me or can you see me as well?
We can see and hear.
Yes. So I'm Julia Elliott-Brown, the founder and CEO of Enter the Arena, and we provide investment and business growth expertise to female founders. Now, I've been in the startup industry in the UK for 25 years or so, and I've built a number of different high growth businesses and raised a lot of investment particularly for my last business. I raised about £2 million worth of funding. But in my experience in raising investment was tough. It's not easy to raise investment no matter how you do it, but as a female founder, there are lots and lots of challenges. And you may have heard the stats that globally only 2.7% of venture funding goes to female founders. So 6 years ago, I set up Enter the Arena to do my part really in redressing the balance and trying to level the playing field in the investment arena. So we provide behind the scenes kind of coaching and advice to those female founders, helping them with their strategy, helping them develop the skills they need to raise investment, and also giving them the support they need along that journey. So that's a little bit about me. So as a story, as a serial entrepreneur that has now turned my experiences into helping other women along that journey.
Thanks, Julia. And when you embarked on the work with the listening people, what challenges were you looking to address and what outcomes were you hoping for?
Well, I think, when we set the business up 5-6 years ago, it was predominantly about raising investment, but the business had really grown a lot since then, because we actually also support women with getting their businesses ready for investment and growing the business in the early days, but also post-investment. We support them too in helping them with the challenges of scaling their business and transitioning really from being a founder into being a CEO. So the business had grown, but the sort of the messaging to the market was sort of stuck where it was at the beginning. And I knew there was an issue there. I knew there was a little bit of lack of clarity in the communication. I was starting to lose confidence in what we were saying to our clients, but it was just going round and round and round and round in my head. And I couldn't see the wood from the trees. And I knew I needed some professional support in getting some clarity in that area. So that's really why I came to listening people for some help.
And when we talked about going out and actually talking to your clients, what were your fears, if any, in embarking on that listening exercise?
Well, I was a bit resistant, as you might remember, Helen. I just thought, well, these women are amazing. Surely they can talk to me, understand my business, have a look at the website, and they've got the insights to be able to help me with my strategy without me, spending time, money, resources in actually going to speak to my customers, because obviously there's an expense involved in undertaking that kind of listening project. So I was a bit resistant to that, as many entrepreneurs are. We don't like spending money unless we absolutely have to. And I was just a little bit skeptical as to whether the work would be done and we'd sort of get the same insights that we would have done without speaking to our customers. And I also wondered whether we would be able to make sense of what we would hear from our customers to be able to then translate that into a future strategy and action plan. So I had kind of quite some reservations around it, but the listening people talked me into it. They had a very strong case, and so I took the leap to embark on a listening project.
And what were your key takeaways from the feedback you heard? Were there any surprises, either pleasant or otherwise?
Yeah, there were, I mean, so many learnings. I'm so glad I did it. Some key things we learned really quickly. We'd always been talking about women entrepreneurs, and what astounded me was that our clients didn't like being referred to as women entrepreneurs. They saw themselves as female founders, which was quite a big shift, actually, because I think if you're calling your clients the wrong thing, you kind of lost them at the first hurdle. So that was the first thing that struck me, and immediately I went and changed everything on our website within about 5 minutes, which was great. But there was a lot more to it than that. I think some nuances. We understood much more about how time was the most important thing for our customers, much more so than money. It was about time. The time was precious, and everything we communicated needed to demonstrate to them how we were going to make their time more efficient, more effective. I think I was overwhelmed by the positive feedback that came from that listening exercise. And that made me realize that we weren't being bold enough in talking about how transformative the work we do is. We weren't shouting about it enough. We were sort of hiding our light under a bushel. So that was another real key takeaway. And there were lots of other, I mean, loads of other things, but those were probably 3 of the things that really jumped into my mind.
Super. And what did the listening exercise ultimately help you do? What actions did you take as a result?
I mean, almost, it was such a shift in the business. I think we restructured the website. We rewrote all of our copy. We came up with a brand new tagline. We renamed all of our coaching programs and redefined the value proposition for each one. We completely looked at our marketing strategy and decided to embark on much more active presence on social media. And we just got, I think, a huge amount of new confidence in what we were doing. You know, it just felt clear. The value proposition was so clear to me after you'd done that work, that confidence to go out and talk to people really shone through. And I think when you've got that confidence, that can make such a difference in terms of how you communicate with clients and win new business.
And what would you say are the results of the work today? Are you seeing it, the return on investment back into the business yet?
Yeah, it's not interesting. I've not actually done a financial calculation because, yes, that would be a very simple way of looking at it. You know, what new business have we run off the back of it? It's really, really hard to actually measure that, to know the absolute difference that it made. But 1 year on, I would say that some of the biggest difference is that everybody that we talk to now is a highly qualified lead, whether they've come to us directly or whether they've come through a partner, because they have looked at our website, they understand our messaging, they understand what we do, who we do it for, what we don't do, who we don't do it for, what the value proposition is, why they should work with us. Lots of great case studies, testimonials. It's kind of that communication piece is doing so much of the work for us. So by the time people come to us, they are, you know, probably 10 times more ready to work with us than they were before. So the efficiency of how the business works is so much stronger. But yeah, I haven't yet done the exercise to measure that. It's quite hard to do.
And any advice you would give to anybody, another female founder or anyone else thinking about embarking on a listening exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important. And I talk to all the female founders that we work with, and there are hundreds of them, about this. And to be fair, not all of them can afford to work with the listening people, because some of them are really early stage businesses. But I think as soon as you are in the position where you can consider doing this kind of project, it's transformative. It makes all the difference. And I think that it's the building block of everything else you do, because if you don't really understand who your customers are, how they feel, think, behave, what influences them, how can you build a business? Because you can't possibly design products and services that meet their requirements if you don't understand them. You can't possibly design a marketing strategy and implementation plan unless you understand your customers. You know, you can't do it. And so you need that as the foundation. And I think when you're in the early days of a business, you've got a good gut feel. And I think my gut feel on customers was good. I mean, it wasn't a million miles away. And it got us quite far. But I think when you're ready to take that next level, it's a hugely important investment, and something you should do before you start thinking about spending money on marketing or building your website or designing new products. It's like, just stop, take a breath, and just really make sure you understand who your customers are. It's fundamental.
And Julia, one last question around actually what you do and what you help female founders do, and that's getting the attention of investors. And you probably have some experience around the listening skills of, you know, these predominantly male arenas. Is there any observations that you would share?
Can you ask me that question again, Helen, so I can make sure I understand?
Yeah, so it's more, I think part of what you're helping women do is break through in the investment arena, and the recognition that, you know, such little capital does go to female founders. And part of that is how male dominated the investment arena is. And it just occurred to me that part of the issue might be that these investors are not listening carefully enough to the female founders who might be asking for investment. So I just wanted to get your perspective on what you're experiencing.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yes, I think that communication is a huge issue, and learning to, we talk a lot about learning to speak the language of investment, but actually maybe we should reframe that as learning how to listen in the world of raising investment. There's a big problem with what I have coined, a term I've sort of coined, bastardized something else, venture splaining. And we get a lot of that from the sort of very male dominated investment arena, particularly for female founders, where they get talked at and really not listened to. And it's very, very frustrating. So I think there's definitely a huge shift we still need to see in the world of investment around really listening to female founders. That's the first point I want to make, and actually just related to that, we have a podcast which I host called Fundraising Stories with Female Founders. Been going for 3 years now, and I have interviewed over 50 amazing female founders who've raised investment, and I'm constantly trying to get investors to listen to that, because when you hear the stories of female founders and the challenges that they have had to go through to raise investment, it's really quite an eye-opener. But I think there are probably not enough investors who are doing that listening work. But I think it goes both ways, because as a female founder, when you're raising investment, if you want to build really strong relationships with investors and find the right investors for you, then listening is absolutely critical, because finding the right investor is like trying to find a husband. And when you get an investor on board, it's like getting married, except it's much harder to get rid of an investment than it is to get rid of a husband. So that listening piece on both sides, when you're trying to find the fit for a startup and an investor, is absolutely critical. And that's very much a key part of what we teach on our fundraising academy program, is for founders to understand how to listen to themselves in terms of what do they really want from investors. We're not very good at listening to ourselves sometimes, but how to ask the right questions and how to create the right environment to encourage investors to communicate about what they're looking for, and to be really listening for that and listening out for the signs. So such a critical skill. Listening is way more than just sort of looking like you're listening and nodding. You have to be genuinely actually listening.
Yeah. And just to say, Julie, in the chat, that Susan Lidner has been very supportive of and loved the venture splaining and may borrow it.
Yes, yes. Well, I need to trademark it because it's a nice one. I think I've sort of bastardized it, obviously from mansplaining, but I think it works quite well.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for sharing those insights. Now we wanted to move on to some of the tools that you can use that help with understanding your audience once you've kind of gone out and done your listening exercise. And Esther, maybe I'll bring you in here on maybe describing what a persona is.
Yes,
and how
thank
they're
you,
used.
Helen. Thank you. First of all, I love listening to Simone and Julia, and I love this quote about from gut feel to the authentic foundation of a business. And for me, as an insight and innovation person, that always starts from understanding who customers and consumers are. So most businesses or service providers will already have a rough idea about who their customers or consumers are. Sometimes these are related to demographics, sometimes to life stage or psychographic assessments. But nowadays, we hear talking more and more about consumer persona, and this goes a step further because these are archetypes of users, almost an ideal customer profile that represents a specific audience the best. Consumer persona have come to the fore quite a lot recently following the rise of design thinking principles in organization, big and small, and also with the rise of UX design. And I don't know if you know, but 4 out of 10 products launched fail because they sell something that nobody wants. So it's really important to drive strong consumer empathy and understand what people truly need and desire at different level, be it functional, emotional, and social, so that product, services, and communication can really be relevant. And I think all of the speakers coming before me were saying this already. So I just want to reinforce to make sure that we do understand. So how do we find that? In some of our latest projects at the Listening People, it all started from interviews. We talk to people, we listen to them, most importantly. We observe customers and consumer goals, their needs, their frustration, their journey from when they start thinking about the problem our clients are tasked to solve, right through the end of a product or service life cycle. And when we see some patterns in behavior and the attitudes, really analyze them deeply so that they can be truly representative of the people that are served by the business in a way that is effective but also actionable, because we want to give recommendations that bring results and that ultimately they raise empathy in helping businesses to understand what they're set out to do. And this might take the form of a little profiler like the one you can see in this slide, which we get deep into the shoes or the stories, to borrow another good word from this session, of the customer, understanding their expectation, their concerns, their motivation, so that we can design services, products, and a customer support model that helps increase our clients' profile and relevance. Then we take this one step further, creating customer journey maps, which are basically visual representation of an experience with a brand, a product, or a stakeholder. And that tells a story about how a customer moves through each phase of interaction, how they experience it. So what we do is we try to identify each touch point with the brand or with the stakeholder and understand the customer's need at each point and understand the impact of the changes in the journey. So at the end, we come up with a consumer journey map or a simulator that includes each stage in the decision-making journey for a certain persona. So depending on who that person is, all the steps from the start to the end of engaging with a certain brand or stakeholder. And for each of these stages, we have all the possible pains, gains, triggers, barriers, or the influencers of a certain behavior. And then we start discussing possible what-if scenarios. So what if we run a PR campaign with this target? What if we run an internal engagement session with this community or the stakeholders? How will that impact sales, and how would impact how we are perceived by the organization? And this kind of perspective has been really valuable to our clients because it helped them understanding an audience from a 360 perspective to unlock, of course, incremental opportunity for business or conversation, but also and I think this is more important, it has helped our business to listen to their customers, to really walk in their shoes, to connect emotionally with them, and to remember why they do what they do, what their purpose is through listening. So it has been really a good exercise to remind that behind the consumer, behind the customer, there is a persona, and it's not a one-off exercise. We are actually making our clients also understand that it needs to be a continuous exercise. We need to keep listening to them, to their customer, and keep our fingers on their pulse.
Thanks, Esther. You know, here's a template that we use for stepping through the customer journey that Esther has just described. And so we often do this with our clients because, you know, you have been on that journey with them. Sometimes you just might not have the time or the space to reflect on what that journey is. So this exercise helps you do that. And so what we try and do tailored to the particular client is think about the different steps that go from, you know, awareness of the product through to consideration, purchase, the partnership itself, and then the advocacy. And then we can also think about that from an internal perspective if your audience and what you're about is, you know, some big change project or something that you're trying to do internally. And so we think about the customer's touch points, their desired outcomes at each of those steps, you know, what timing they have, what their attitudes and thoughts are, really their emotional responses to what's happening or where they are in the journey, their emotional needs, you know, what can we provide them through our touch points, as Esther said, the pain points, some of their areas of weakness where they may need support, and their areas of strength, and then a sense of how important is this step in the journey to them. And so when we've done that with clients, you kind of, that's where you get to more of the emotional connection, I think, but also the empathy, because, you know, we did it recently with a client who is an equity diversity consultant and expert, and had been in-house and corporate. So she really did understand what these people, her potential clients, have to go through and the barriers that they meet, but she hadn't necessarily thought about it in the context of, you know, what she is now providing them. And so I think, Esther, it was cathartic exercise in kind of going through and thinking about, you know, where their barriers were, their challenges and other things, and really helped her think about then where she can meet them and what support she can provide to them as they go along on that journey. And then, as Esther said, we can then, that gives us a great deal of insight to really think about what are the interventions that we can make to meet our audience where they are, and you know, with what they need when they need it. And this is, you know, just a diagram that kind of goes to more of a sales funnel than a change curve, but it could equally apply to a change curve in a big organization. And you can just get a flavor of the sorts of things that a business can do to deliver the right marketing or communications interventions at the right time, and ideally on message, and segmented for that audience. In terms of listening exercises, I mean, one of my favorite bits when we play it back to clients is the all the great feedback that they get, and, you know, being able to tell a client, your customers really love you and this is what they love about you, and just seeing, you know, the confidence that gives to people. And I guess the other thing I would say, you know, Julia talked about the resistance to you know, going out and talking to customers, and I see that a lot with organizations, whether they're small or indeed big, because I think we have an internal dialogue that says it's either too early, or they don't fully understand the product yet, or whatever it might be. But the you know, we obviously heard Julia's great experience, but also nobody has ever said, I really wish I hadn't asked when they do get their listening report. And we do find that the insights from that listening really do then permeate so much of what our clients are doing. I, have a case study from when I worked at EY several years ago, and went into lead communications for their quality and risk management practice or function. And it was, we were coming up to a strategy day, trying to think about our priorities. And I persuaded them that we should go out and talk to key stakeholders in the business, particularly the global client service partners, about how they perceived the function. And it turned out that they were really seen as a blocker. And they didn't want to be a blocker. They really wanted to enable great client service and be partners with these global client service partners. So it helped them really think about what their priorities were, and then how they were managing their teams and how their teams were showing up and doing their jobs. And maybe they were being too much like policemen rather than taking an enabling approach. So, we were able to then create a strategy that was more enabling, but still doing the right thing by quality and risk management, doing some internal training, etc. So just an example of how it can be applied internally. Before I go on to answer, well, actually, Claire, you have a question in the chat about, how early you are in your business and not ready to go and talk to customers yet as you develop. I guess the answer to what is it that you can do now to better understand client needs is think about, maybe you work on a persona yourself based on what you know about the audience, what you think their pains and gains are, their motivators, where they're looking, and then think about who you know that fits that persona and just go and have a coffee with them, and then find the next person and go and have a coffee with them, and just pick up the insights that way, and give yourself the time and space to reflect on what you're hearing and what insights you were getting for those coffees. And how it might then inform what you're doing. So before I hand back over to Meg, I guess the key takeaways are: be conscious of how you listen and the different levels of listening. Check out Oscar Trimboli. Consider how well you know your audience. Is there an expectation gap between your message and their experience? And then how will you close that gap? What can you do to check in with your audience today? Anything from good questions via email or instant message, to test out, something that you're thinking about or you want to get more insight on, to coffees I just mentioned, to Claire, to full listening exercises. And then take action based on the insights that you get from any listening exercise, to again demonstrate and be authentic with your audience. So thank you. That was what we had to cover today. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Thanks so much for having us. Meg.
Helen, thank you so much. The presentation today was so jam full of fascinating things to think about. So I want to, if we were all in person, we'd give you all a big round of applause. Helen, Simone, Julia, and Esther, thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts. And it was, I found very inspiring on many levels. I think one of the things we like to do at Quorum is to never leave a time that we're together without thinking about the action we might take from what we just experienced or learned from each other. And so I think I'd like to challenge all of you. I mean, there were so many nuggets. It sort of started out at the top with, how you really think about your genuine connections, authentic, genuine connections. And in order to do that, you really have to understand your audience. We talked a bit about storytelling, which is something at Quorum we spent a lot of time talking about over the years, and probably something we continue to visit all the time, because I think Simone mentioned, there's just a million ways to connect more authentically if you've really worked on your own storytelling. So that's an amazing challenge and something that would be great for all of us. This notion of understanding your audience so that you're not selling at, but selling, really understanding what your audience cares about and connecting there. And then really understanding the journey of the people that you're trying to impact. What's their story, their life, their interest, either in a product that you're selling or an idea even that you're selling, which is kind of a fascinating concept. So I feel like you gave us so much to work with to kind of apply to our life in many levels. I guess the big challenge I would put out to the Quorum community is, can we go away from today and think about the next time we are engaging with an audience, and think about actually not only the story that we're going to tell about ourselves in that moment, but also what we want to get out of that engagement with the audience that you've surrounded yourself with in that moment, and really use it as an exercise, a moment to really rethink the way we do that. So I'm going to challenge us all to do that, because it's soon holiday season. So I know we're still in the middle of this crazy pandemic, but I think there's probably a few more opportunities than normal for people to connect, whether virtually or in person. And so I challenge us all to think that through and apply some of this great content and ideas that was shared by this terrific group of women, Helen, Simone, Julia, and Esther. We're so appreciative. I'm gonna, another really big applause for all of you. I'm gonna just end saying, pay attention, because we actually, believe it or not, are gonna try and get together face to face, which seems so crazy. It's been 2 years since anybody in this organization has seen each other face to face. And we're going to do it in some of the markets that we have chapters in. So New York, DC, and London, they're coming up. New York and DC will be in December. London will be in January. If you could make it, we would really love to see you. We're going to be as safe and do it as safely as possible, and make it a moment to really connect with each other. And in fact, we can even apply some of these great things we learned today at that moment. So there you go. We'd love to see you and hope you can make time for it. And I think that's a wrap, Diane, for today. I think that's everything we wanted to